I need to explain this title, how it came about. I didn't think of it. When Farida phoned me, she said, Chris, would you come and talk? And I said, yeah, sure. And she said, what are you going to talk about? So I said, well, it'll be about what I do with my students and how it's changed. So about a month later, I get the program, and I'm talking about post-colonial praxis. And I thought, what? Where did this come from? I better go and see what it means. So I went and looked at post-colonial, and I thought, yeah, it sounds interesting. But then I listened to some YouTube videos and things, and the people would say, but you know, post-colonial is quite contentious. It's post-who, and who colonized who, etc., etc. And praxis, that's, in a way, that's really just a fancy word, which means, Farida knows lots of fancy words, I suppose. It's a fancy word for practice, but it's practice and thinking about it, reflecting on it, and then changing your practice. So it's like continually improving while you're busy making. That's what praxis is. So this just talks about the issue of post-colonial and decolonizing. All I'm really trying to say here is that I try to engage with the term itself and then realize that isn't really, you could look at it that way, but that's not particularly what I'm doing. The angle that I'm looking at post-colonial really has to do with a hegemony. And this here at the bottom comes from Google. I had to look up what hegemony means and find other words that all of us would probably understand better. And some of the words here talk about dominance, supremacy, ascendancy, authority, mastery, control, power. So in other words, what I've realized, or the place where I'm going with my post-colonial practice, with my teaching, is I've become aware of the need to identify the things that control the way that we think and what we do with the students and what the students bring and what it is that controls them. Because the fact is that we are surrounded by hegemonies. The hegemonic issues are all around you. Let me show you some examples. So examples of hegemonic values is that you have to dress fashionably. I see there's a fair amount of you that are bowing to the hegemony of fashion. And also the notion that women aren't very good drivers, and that you're not much of a person if you don't have a credit card. Of course, you're not allowed to be fat. That's just a taboo. Somebody said that, we don't know who. The police know exactly what they're doing. And then if we get to jewelry, this whole, and I'm sorry if there's no one from De Beers here, is there? No. I always feel so guilty, but this notion of diamonds are forever. I mean, so is quartz, so is sapphires, and the forever is so long that by the time all those other stones aren't there anymore, we won't care anymore. And the problem for me as a gemology lecturer is that the other stones are so much more beautiful. I mean, how can you compete with a piece of labradorite or a piece of moss agate that's been cut just right, like a landscape agate? I mean, the issue for me is that if you want a 1 carat D flawless diamond, I can find one by tomorrow, by this afternoon. If you want a piece of moss agate that has a tree on it, maybe 3 months' time, once Vadam comes back from India, who knows? I can't find you one. But somehow the diamond is more valuable than the beautiful piece of moss agate. So I have an issue with the hegemony of diamonds. Gold, being so wonderful, and then all we end up working in is 9 carat. Really? I mean, so there is some value in gold, but I think that we need to get to the root of it. Like, what is it that is so wonderful about gold? And it's that rich yellow color. Just that color just grabs you. It's almost like you can smell it. I don't know if you've ever Have you ever been tempted? You see it and you almost want to like bite it or do something to it. I remember the fright I got, or how amazed I was the first time I rolled some fine gold out quite thinly. So I had this long leafy shape, and then I annealed it. And then when I picked it up, I only picked the one half up. The other half stayed on. It just drooped like that, and I thought, that is amazing. I had no idea gold was so soft. So I end up working a lot in fine silver, fine gold, because it can do things that 9-carat can't. And then the other thing is brass, copper, aluminium. I mean, I don't know how many of you have ever tried to patinate platinum, patinate gold. You can't do it. It doesn't want to. That's why it's sought after, because it doesn't change color. So if you want a really nice color, you use silver or you use copper. You can patinate it. It shows age. It picks up a bit of a history. So there's a lot of value there. Anyway, so those are some of the hegemonies in jewelry. And then in terms, I had to sort of acknowledge some post-colonial things. And my issue with jewelry design as such is much more from an educational aspect. And it has to do, and in a way, I'm also talking to the lecturers, to the trainers, not the students as such. Because a long time ago, I used to think I was a good lecturer because I did all these wonderfully creative briefs. I mean, you could, if you responded well to a brief of mine, you would make an amazing piece of jewelry. Except my students didn't understand the briefs. I would just do these, I would dream up wonderful things, and then the stuff that I got back was like I was speaking some foreign language because they just didn't realize, couldn't get it. So I've changed to actually, I've become aware of the fact that with the students, there's a lot more that they have. Whereas I thought that I had something, and this is where Paulo Freire comes in. He sort of is concerned with the banking model of education. You know, where I've got all the knowledge, and you all empty, and I'm going to bank it, and then you'll have it. Or like you, the empty vessel, and I've got this container, and I'm just going, just open your mouth, I'll pour it in, and then you'll have it. And it just doesn't work like that. So what he does is he advocates these are just 3 of the things he advocates. The one is that education is like a dialogue, it's a conversation. It's not like this, where I stand here and I tell you how it is. Because you might be sitting there talking to a friend next door to you, etc., and you miss the whole point, which means that you know nothing. And actually, that's not true. The learning that will happen from our interaction is if afterwards you have a conversation with your friend and you clarify terms that you heard and you say, did he mean this or did he mean that? Or you talk to me. But me just talking to you doesn't mean that you've learned anything. Until the dialogue happens, no learning has taken place. And so the thing that I want to focus on there is that the learning happens when there's collaboration, and it's guided by the curriculum. So the curriculum sort of suggests a path that you should go, but it doesn't say that if you've gone down that path, you will have learned something. It just suggests an end, and here's a path, and these are potential vehicles that you could use. It's just a guide. The second thing that I'd like that he emphasized was praxis, which means informed action to make a difference. So it's not just doing something, it's being informed in the doing of that. And that in the doing of that thing, it needs to have make a tangible difference in the end. So if I tell you how to do something and you do it, nothing much has happened. You might have learned how to do it, but you don't know why you're doing it. You don't know how you're going to apply it. You don't know what its value is in terms of something else. So constantly in the doing, there needs to be thinking about what it is that is being done and where it is going to go to, which also means that it needs to be a negotiation. Because one of the things that you want to do is you want to engage. Now, the other important thing, Freire didn't say it, but learning happens when you engage. If you don't engage, no learning happens. So in other words, I need to engage my students. So teaching isn't talking to the students, it's entertaining them. Because it's the moment you start entertaining them, they pay attention, they become engaged, and then they learn something. I can give you a wad of notes like this, and all the YouTube videos, and all the exercises, and that's no guarantee that you're going to learn anything. But if I show you, oh no, but hang on here, look out, tried it like this, and you try it, and what does yours look like, and what went wrong there? Or I highlight my mistakes. I'll show you my mistakes, and I need to engage you, which means I need to entertain you. And I think that our lecturers, myself included, can be a lot more entertaining than we are. I've seen some dreadful examples of teaching, and you lose the students there, just completely. Then the third thing is that education should be situated in lived experience. In other words, it should be part of your life. It should be relevant to your lived experience, not my lived experience. If I can get you to engage with your lived experience, you'll be engaged. You will do something useful, you will learn something, you will feel like you belong. So, I need to go back to the previous slide. You see there at the top, the weeds? I put that there to remind myself. Because part of what I'm trying to do is I thought it was just doing, to focus on indigenous. But it can be a bad thing if it's just indigenous. And this weeds refers to gardening. I have a friend who has a beautiful indigenous garden. So I also wanted to have an indigenous garden. And I said to him, so how do you do this? He said, all you do is you pull out the weeds. The plants are there automatically. Just make sure you pull out the weeds, and then you will have an indigenous garden. So I'm regarding the hegemonies as the weeds. If you can identify the things that control you, the things that smother you, and get rid of them, you'll be doing indigenous jewelry. Sorry, that wasn't finished. So I just wanted to show some examples of how we do it in the department. I didn't have all because I'm on study leave, I'm not on my computer at work, so I don't have access to the students' work, etc., but I did find some. So we started, I was now on this hunt for indigenous, so I found a beadworker. There she sits on the right, her name is Shlengi Dube, and she came and did the very first bead workshop with us at Technikon Natal, and we sat around the table and she dished out beads, and people started talking she was talking, everybody was talking to each other. While she was busy teaching the stitch, everybody was talking, like, what does yours look like? What does yours look like? Ah, look here, and how do you do this? And what happens is the talk around the table is where the teaching happens. That's where the learning happens, is how did you do it? How do you turn? Where does the needle go now? I mean, I do the whole drawing and everything on the board, and it doesn't mean anything to you until you get to the end. Now, does the needle go this way or does it go that way? Because you're holding it like this and I drew it like, it's impossible. So the whole point is that learning takes place through this collaboration around the table when we teach beadwork. But it's really difficult to get the students to talk because they think they're in a classroom, they need to sit quietly and pay attention. And I have to leave the room so that they feel like they're naughty, they're talking to each other. And I stay outside until they're really talking, and then I sneak back in, and then they realize, oh, it's okay, they can talk to each other. This was just some beadwork that we did, the notion of being guided by the curriculum. So we teach color theory using beadwork. They have to do they do the skill, and then we show them some color schemes, and then they have to go and buy the beads to do the color scheme. And I'm not sure it's going to work. Maybe I should just go to the next slide. So the other thing that where we are at the moment is this notion of your own story has value. Go and look in your own life, your own lived experience to find the story that you have to tell, because it's in the stories that the value lie. So I want to show you Songezo, his colleague, he's an ex-student. So what he did is he went home, he was looking at weaving, and he saw how an ox whip was made, and he made one, and then like this. Then on the next page it shows his mother holding the draw plate, and he did this when he went home. And then he did some weaving, and he actually took that stitch and did it by weaving. So, and he was quite amazed. We were all amazed that you could actually in your backyard find these things that are of value and that you draw on them. And he's now 5 years down the line and just going full tilt using weaving. He's now busy examining the grass bangles that young boys, when they herd cattle, that they weave, and he's finding communities that do all this weaving and all the grasses that they use. And you can see his work at Ronnie's gallery, if it's not all sold. And then the other person is Nomfundo. That's the necklace on the left she called Mafu, which also turned out to be one of her ancestral names. And it's because she went to the Reed dance and she saw the jewelry that people were wearing, and she wanted to do something like that. And eventually we found a way for her to do that. That was about 7-8 years ago. And what she does now, she's gone on from there, and she makes jewelry like this that she sells in Durban at various galleries, coming from her own story. But the thing is to go to your own story and have the courage to stick with it. Like Bev was saying, is your own story has value. Just, nobody can say that you're wrong. It's your story. So this is, you might have seen some of this. This is Marlene. She's just finished a PhD in visual art, in jewelry. And this is a necklace. And her story is, it has to do with, not life. I suppose life is difficult. Thorns, but it's also beautiful. So it's made from porcelain. Those thorns are, we find them in the reserve just outside our house, and then she covers them with porcelain. And the piece of rope has notions of tying, like being bound, tying. That it's a lot more complex. You'll have to read a thesis to really understand it. As are these. These have to, they're very beautiful, but they crocheted from binding wire and fine silver wire. They're not wearable at all. It alludes to that trap of wearability and beauty, and it's just a big trap. All these beautiful things, but they're still beautiful. And then there's some of my stuff which talks about, I only have 3 slides like this. This piece of, so it's a cameo of this stereotypical pretty profile. You know that hegemonic value of women are so beautiful? That's what so I'm working with the stereotype. And the thing is, I'm completely a victim of that stereotype. I'm always so disappointed if I meet a pretty woman that's not clever. I just think, what? But you're so beautiful, why aren't you clever? You know? Like, I have this picture in my mind. Anyway, so there's this beautiful woman at the top, but look at the bottom. Can you see that there is a woman in there? And she's in pieces, and it's underneath the beauty. So it's actually composed of lots of pieces that if you can get it together, if you can just hold it together, you will come across like in a certain way, but actually deep down under, it's a bit different. And then the gold at the top, that's Ferrero Rocher? That's a Ferrero Rocher wrapper. And then this is the latest stuff that I'm doing, which is recycled high-density polyethylene. And I just love it. I think it's wonderful. I like the things that it says about this prettiness, about the woman past, where's the title? There's supposed to be a title on you. Did you take it off? It's supposed to say past the sell-by date. So is it, and I like that ambiguity, is it women that are past their sell-by date, or is it the way that men see women that is past its sell-by date? Because that's actually what I see. But I like the first obvious jump that women are past their sell-by date. You know, big joke, big joke. But actually, it's a much deeper message behind that. And there's a title. That's weird. Anyway, so here's some more high-density polyethylene with a Ferrero Rocher wrapper inside there. And it's called Amahlandla inyoko, which is the spine of a snake. And Songezo, in looking at these grass bangle weaving stitches, came across a stitch that looks like the spine of a snake, and it just resonated. When I saw this, I thought, this looks like a spine of a snake. But I also have the spine of a python hanging on my veranda. We went walking in the reserve once and came across all these bones and picked them all up and strung them together, and it's a python that's about 3 meters long. So I have this constant visual stimulation. I see it all the time, and I didn't. So when I look at that, I see the reserve where we were and where we picked up, and it's a connection to Songezo, and it's the chocolates that were bought for me, etc. So that's my story. If you like it, you're welcome to it, but you don't have to like it because I think it's wonderful. Okay.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was great. Do you have any questions for Chris? Any comments?
Remember, that means there's no living that's
Oh.
Thanks. I worked with Chris years ago, and he taught me something. He was an external examiner where I was teaching at that stage at Durban Westville University. Yeah. And I think she was a bit after me. And there was a piece of jewelry, obviously Durban Westville at that stage at mostly Indian students, and there was one of my students had to make a little bowl, and then they had to make a silver stand for it. And she made this perspex or this resin bowl, and she put a lot of glitter in it. Yes. It was so ugly that I wanted to cry. And Chris said, you must remember, pink is the navy blue of India. And I will never forget that. That's what you taught me, to accept, not to be so critical, not to use my own concepts in my head that I have, and just be more accepting of whatever somebody gives you. Thanks.
Thank you, Liz.
I just wanted to make a comment. We have Songezo, who's doing really incredible, groundbreaking stuff, I feel, in contemporary jewelry in this country. And why is he not in galleries overseas? And because it feels like we have Ledumo, who's done a similar thing in terms of knitwear, and is incredibly successful and has work. He's just got work in MoMA and at the Cooper Hewitt Museum and all over the place, and he's become sort of a design icon of South Africa. And it feels like Songezo's doing something very similar in jewelry and something very successful, and he's not nearly as well known and internationally known. So what is it about jewelry where we're struggling to get our stuff out there and to be appreciated as art, where it has been happening in fashion and in textiles? So just your thoughts on that.
Songezo makes beautiful stuff, but I think at this stage he still is bound by that Western idiom, the hegemony of making it, because the other things that he can do, he's much more interested in that. He gets a lot more back out of that. He made a tray for his mother's oven in which the chickens can go, and he made it by hand from steel, doing it all. He's the handyman. He puts in solar system for his mother in Umzimkhulu. Like, he's wonderful as a human being and doing all those things. And at the moment, he just sees jewelry as making enough money to get on with his life. It would be nice to do those things, but it's the quality of life that one has with, and that, I think that's part of the reason. I mean, that's why I'm not famous. Is it so wonderful being in the type of department where I am, where it's like you're at the coalface, you're encountering people and the beginnings of design and stories, and you feel as if you are, it sounds so kitsch to say you're making a difference, but a few years later, you bump into people that have a family, and it's because they were convinced and they could carry on, and they're just doing other things. And it's almost like that gives you more. It's quite tense going into the world and now going to sell yourself, and all of a sudden you're at the mercy of people that like your work because it's expensive, because somebody else has it, because they feel they ought to have it. So if I thought somebody really liked my work for exactly what it was, I would just give it to them. But no, you can't have any. Sorry, Trace. So I think it's a lot more complex than that, and I think the issues that we have in South Africa are a lot denser than just design jewelry. Just the design problem is a different sort of problem, you know. I think it's very complex. Sorry, Tracy was.
Something like, hello, yeah. You're talking about something like, it's like you look at some jewelers and you're like, oh, but that's not real jewelry because it's been shoddily put together. And then you've got other jewelers that are doing kind of very way out avant-garde stuff and artistic stuff. And, you've got high-end jewelry, which is your Uwe your Browns, everyone knows their name. But we're kind of establishing something completely different. And I think it is, as much as it is about finding your design niche, it's also about finding your niche. And if you don't want to be a famous kind of, contemporary jewelry artist, then, as much as women have the right now to, have their say and everything like that, they can also be a housewife. It's the same thing. You don't have to be that person. But I do think what is important is that more South Africans know about. At the very least, someone like that is making progress. South African jewelers need to be inspired by that, because that's where definitely, we look at, you need to look all over the place. Internationally, locally, that's not I feel like you're biasing yourself if you say one thing's right and the other thing isn't. But I do think as far as inspiration goes, when it's somebody that's from your country, we all feel such a sense of pride, and I think that exposure is important, and it should be as important. It should be as important as every other design and art field.
That's why we're here.
I find that sometimes that kind of exposure that happens, and it's very annoying that people that are famous had a lucky break. And the break was that they knew the fashion editor of Cosmopolitan who was looking for something red for 3 months down the line, and they happen to have it, and then it goes in, and somebody sees it. It's not through any hard work, it's just luck. And the people that work really hard, they just make a living, and it doesn't make sense. I've had too many students that I know that 30 minutes before the courier comes for Anglo Gold competition, runs in with a design that completely contradicts the brief, the requirements, and wins. And then I know another student that spends 3 months doing all the prototypes and all the drawings. They don't even, not even a finalist. So it's the problem of who is it that's looking for this? Who are the judges that gets you into where? I once had a community project where I was teaching women jewelry. It was like a poverty alleviation project that used waste materials to make jewelry from, except it was in Manguzi, very up northern Natal, except they were preparing for when the waste center came online. So I had to bring the waste from Durban. I had to bring bags full of empty cans, drive it 4 hours up the coast so that I could do a waste recycling project with people. Then the projects that they made, nobody bought them. So because the money for the project, there was so much for the trainers and so much for the lunch allowance for all these workers. Whatever other money there was never came to the project. It was used on 4x4s and other sort of stuff. I ended up buying, like for R2 each, I bought these little bracelets from the women as they made them. I still have a whole bag full of them. That if the money was spent on the marketing and finding the right people, it could have taken off. Of course, 2 months later, MOSA happened, that in London, South Africa, because they had the funding and they went to the right places, and it happened, and it showed that it can happen. Then somebody puts in a tender for another project, and they get the tender, and they subcontract it to someone who subcontracts it, who then eventually finds some academic staff member who's interested, who does it for, I don't know, I can't even remember, I got a weekend away. Ronnie?
So Judy was next, and then
Okay. Chris, I just want to make some comments around the word hegemony. And I think in this department, when we joined, Frida and I joined, some of the hegemonic practices or understandings or stereotypes was that the black students were bench workers and white students could design. So we had to kind of collectively revisit those paradigms. And I think that was an important breakthrough for this department. When I joined, we had the first cohort of black BTech students. There weren't any graduates previously. So I think that's an important point to remember in the post-colonial debate. And also as academics, the weight I have and the weight you have differs by virtue of race or politics or where you come from. And those are realities, especially in the jewelry industry. It is raced and it is gendered. And I think you can't ignore it, so acknowledge it and try and fix it, because those are some of the more critical problems that plague this industry. And then in terms of Geraldine's, sorry, I just have to do this. I think I drive an international agenda in the sense that for the past 4 years, we've given almost 20 students an opportunity to exhibit internationally. And so from the Jewelry Institute in New York, where they manufactured, they had exhibitions at Pratt University. So we've already instilled that kind of new thinking about breaking or transcending those boundaries. And then just for your information, for next year, I still work with the department. We were working on a short learning program where students go to Van Cleef & Arpels in Paris and then go to the Sciences Po Lowell Jewelry School. So, and part of that understanding is that there aren't platforms nationally that would listen to black voices. And that is a reality. So I think when you talk about this building the jewelry discourse, acknowledge it is raced and that there needs to be a more open dialogue.
Thank you, Judy. Very important point. Ronnie, and then Eric, and then Palesa. Sorry, Palesa.
Can you hear me? I maybe should hold this until I get there. But I just wanted to make the point that jewelry is little, literally little. If you're a fashion designer, you can make a fabulous top. You can have 500 of them made. Somebody can find you, and it can be all around the world. The majority of people working here or in our industry are making one-off pieces. So I've got to wear it. Somebody's got to see it around my neck and say, gee, I like that. Who made that? I tell them who made it, and maybe they'll buy one. And I think that is the biggest problem, that we'll never get that fame as jewelers unless we go commercial. George Jensen, Geraldine mentioned him earlier, is a perfect example. He churned it out. It's beautiful stuff. He churned it out. So there's a big step to be taken. If you want to be famous and make lots of money, you're going to have to go commercial. You're going to have a factory that makes it, which is fine. but that's the choice that I don't think anybody in this room is making. I might be wrong. Maybe the new students will go this way. But nobody working here is doing anything other than one-offs, as I see it. And that size thing is a big issue. A painting can hang in the wall of a gallery and can be seen by millions of people. My little pair of earrings, who's going to see them? And I think that is something that we have to realize as journalists. Sorry?
Size matters.
Not always. It's how you use it.
Sorry, we've moved on from Chris now. But I just wanted to go back to Geraldine's question of fame with Laduma and why Songezo and those kind of people aren't making it, you know. Firstly, I think fame is overrated, totally. But the good thing that comes from fame is more people gets to see it. You know, more people gets educated on what is going on. So that's the nice thing about it. The rest is kind of whatever. If you want to be in a magazine, whatever. It's stupid. But back to Ronnie, that just said that you have to mass produce to be famous. Laduma, for instance, who is now the famous person we're talking about, he's got a one-off jersey in MoMA that's just been launched next to another Irish knit or something to show the African aspect of that knitting technique. Now that's a one-off. And what, 1 million people will see that? They'll know about knitting in Africa? That's wonderful, and I think that's great. And when you say it's easy selling a painting because it's big, it's easy selling clothing because there's 500. I sell one ring at a time. Now, whether I make 500 of them or not is irrelevant, because I can go to the V&A in London, and there's actually an entire jewelry section that shows their local and international jewelry to every person who comes into the V&A. Now, that includes art, that includes pottery, that includes everything. I think part of the problem in South Africa is that we still look at art as art, and it needs to hang on a wall, then it's art. Our museums dedicate themselves to that. They do not see a beer pot, a Zulu beer pot, maybe with different patterns on it or whatever, as art. No, that's a rural cultural object of use. We don't need that. We don't need, I think Laduma's thing is based on Xhosa initiations and then the clothing they got to wear. And he realized that they used to buy these international brands after the initiation to make them smart and luxurious and stuff like that. And he said, well, that's wrong. Why don't you get local fashion designers expensive local fashion designers to show your stuff? And that's how they changed the way of looking at it. And yes, fine, people picked up on it and made him famous. But I think the mindset in South Africa to mass produce and we have to get into this commercial world is not wrong. Like, we just need to approach design as an art form, because that is what it is. Art was also just used at a stage to show your status. So is jewelry. Why is it different? It's just because someone sold it differently to you. So I think you can take design in all its forms and shapes and sizes and make it and sell it as art. And then people will know and more people will see what that is. Thank you, bye.
Thank you, Eric. I think we're taking the last person, Palesa. We're running heavily over time.
Okay, I was going to reiterate what the gentleman said there. I think it all boils down to form follows function. And Ludumo. His main focus was the idea that this is going to help young boys in the initiation, and it's something that they're going to wear all the time, because these new clothes, they have to wear them all the time. So now the jewelry that we make, unfortunately, a lot of people will think, what is the function? I'm going to buy this ring, and for most people it will be like a sentimental function, but other people are like, but I don't need this, and they have certain needs that they need to service first over the desire of being luxurious or having, fulfilling this need of, I fit into the status quo, So I think if maybe the country can overcome this small, economic boundary that makes it hard for jewelers to become famous or, have their brands reaching everybody, then, only then, can our work be recognized, because it really does boil down to form and the function. I always think about that, even for myself when I make jewelry. I'm like, oh man, who's gonna buy this? Because what need is it serving, So yeah, that's my comment.
Thank you, Palesa. Chris, any closing comments? Wise words.
Last words. I agree with this thing of form follows function. The problem just is, we were having I'll be with you now. We were busy trying to find this definition of contemporary jewelry. And a resource that we use at DUT is called the Virtual Gallery of Contemporary Jewelry, which is a wonderful CD, and it has some papers that are written about it, about the various types of value that are contributed by contemporary jewelry. And the definition that Kenneth Quickenen, who wrote it, what he does is he says that contemporary jewelry is jewelry that is made today which engages with contemporary social, environmental, technical, or artistic trends. So if the function is to engage with a social trend, that's the function. So your contemporary jewelry, it's social, artistic, environmental, and technical. So if you don't have to, if you make commercial jewelry to point out something about artistic things, that could still be contemporary jewelry. I think the problem with separating commercial from contemporary is probably leading to us not really designing wonderful jewelry, because we think, well, that's commercial and that's contemporary. And then if we then go further to the hegemony of European, Western values and issues, and we're trying to say contemporary jewelry has to address that, Lord, we're getting completely lost. So I do think somebody like Songezo at one stage will produce wonderful jewelry, but there's so many ducks that he has to get in a row and sort out exactly what it is he wants to do and the method of production. To train people to weave the way that he does, they get bored. Their fingers get too sore. He'll practice it 4 times, and then the 5th time, it's good enough to go to a shop. Whereas when he tries to teach the students. He's a lecturer there, but they can't sit still for long enough. They don't want to make the wire that fine and weave it that tight. And if they make a mistake, they just hand it in like that. If he makes a mistake, he starts all over again. Melts it, starts all over again. And that's why he charges 20,000 Rand for it. Because he won't do it for less than that. It just doesn't pay him to do that. Anyway.